Welcome to the Chief Endurance Officer Podcast. I'm your host, Greg McDonough. Each week, we hear real-time stories from athletes and CEOs on how to maximize performance through an endurance mindset. Let's get started. Well, welcome to the Chief Endurance Officer Podcast. I'm your host, Greg McDonough. Today's guest is a powerhouse in team building, leadership, athlete transition success. She has thrived as a trailblazer in a Fortune 100 company, leading high-impact projects and developing an M&A pipeline worth more than $10 billion. She is the author of The Athlete Advantage, offers a roadmap for athletes transitioning smoothly from high-performance teams to achieving their greatest potential in business. The founder and president of Success Beyond Game Day. Please welcome Samantha Card. Welcome, Samantha.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited for today.
It's you got my blood flowing already. So let's jump right into it. We love talking about the endurance mindset. So tell us, Samantha, how your endurance mindset has impacted your life unexpectedly.
So it's always started when I was young. I never had a fear of failure. Sometimes I would test the boundaries. So I established that habit in myself to test those edges, not only in sport. Sport was a catalyst for it. But it really became something that was a part of my DNA. So I would say my endurance is really the culmination of multiple failures ever since I was probably 4 years old playing sport. And I've just repackaged it in different ways and parallel path, the sport aspect as well as the professional aspect.
I love the fact that you brought up failure because it's such a big component of our journeys. And really, I find that most of my learning comes from when I've failed or just pushed the edge. You mentioned early age, 4 years old. Do you remember the first failure, the first falling on the bike, or like what comes to mind when you think of your early age and testing that boundary and having that first failure?
Oh, yeah. I've had multiple. I've been hit by a pitch in the eye and still played. I'll tell you one that was real interesting. It was during travel ball. And we were, the team wanted to relax before. So we went to like the playground. So this was probably maybe like 8, 9 years old. Maybe 10, but within that range, pretty young. And we were in the playground and I ended up going down the slide and there was a wasp nest and yellow jacket bees. I think that's what they're called. And I ended up getting stung in the eye. And I still played that game with one eye shut. And it just shows you that when you put your mind to something, you don't think of all the reasons why it won't work. You think of, well, what if it does? So that was like one little tangible thing early on that really kind of resulted in no excuse-based culture for me.
And was that something that somebody gave you an example of, or you were taught? Or did it just truly just come out in the moment and you realize you have this resilience and then fostered it over time? Or is there some sort of, mentor, parent, buddy that kind of helped you discover?
So my parents always allowed me to fail, right? So I was able to fall. I was able to get, a little dirt on me, right? I was able to fail to the point where the lesson came after, not before, and prevent it. And those very foundational things were pretty critical for me. Now, I took that and ran with it. And I was also the youngest, right? So I was always the rule breaker. And it wasn't, when I say rule breaker, it was around, well, why can't it be, right? So it drove the curiosity. And then that curiosity led to, okay, I definitely can fail, but I never lost the optimism. And that I think is the biggest part of grit. It's not just the resiliency, it's never losing the optimism relative to failing at a high degree and learn how to fail at a higher level each time as you go.
Fantastic. How are you seeing that show up in your life now?
Multitude of ways, right? So can you imagine having a bleak resume, graduating with a fancy degree, majored in chemistry? They had taken softball out of the Olympics. All my goal sets were really slated to, going for it for the Olympics. That was out. The economy had been pulled back in 08, 09. And here I was with a life in front of me. So I could either survive that or I can reset my mindset, and thrive in it, in the unknowingness. And a lot of times, what holds us back is because we don't know what is coming next. So for me, it's always been handling the ambiguity and gray, not knowing what's ahead, finding your pockets of moments where you can get that comfortability, i.e., kind of going to the gym. Like, for example, going to the gym, I knew how to do that, but then it left the space for me to go into this unknowingness of what is next and not wavering around the ego part of it and not knowing the outcome. I really don't care about outcomes. Like, the winning happens when you actually work on yourself and milepost what you believe you should be at versus where you're actually at, and holding yourself accountable to that.
That's so well said. Winning happens when you work on yourself. Could you go a little bit deeper and help our audience sort of really grasp what you mean by that?
So a lot of times, we like the idea of, oh, champion, elite. But a lot of people forget how many years and how many failures and how many bruised egos one must go through to get there, right? They just see the end result of someone and they think that happened overnight. And I know people say that, but what does it really mean to be elite? What does it really mean to be a world champion? And it's, to be honest with you, I never had a summer off. I never had a vacation until I was like 20 some years old. I never had summer break. I never had winter break. I never had spring break. And I never thought of it as a letdown or what I'm missing. I focused on my responsibility and framed my mindset and trained my mind. My mind didn't train me, because I could have let my mind say, oh, well, all my friends are doing this. But I made a conscious choice to deal with the bad days that came with it. But, really spent the time on the moments, those moments where you don't want to get out of bed and then you do it because you don't want to do it, instead of, oh, I'm feeling great today, I'm going to go work out. Those moments are important, but the real ones that define where you're headed is when you have nothing left in the tank and you still do it. And it doesn't have to be these big things. It's those small choices that culminate into the big gains that most people think are beneath them, but are the most critical components to the outcomes that they aim to achieve.
Could you give us an example of one of those small things when you're, again, lying there in bed, you don't wanna go do your workout because you're just burnt out from the week? What's the small thing that kind of would get you going to put that one step forward?
So I'll give you an example of a travel schedule. Sometimes I'm in 3 states in a day. Most people would give themselves the permission to say, you know what, maybe you don't work out before because your flight's at 6 in the morning. You give yourself permission. If you give yourself permission to not do something, then you're not going to do it. If you give your self permission to pack in the morning, then you will. Like, that's an area that I'm not great at. I pack in the morning and I could probably do it the night before, so I could free up a little bit more space for myself to have that alarm go off, never hit snooze, and actually go out and run. You don't have to go to the gym. You can get a workout by just running or even walking. Just get your blood moving. It's those choices. It's when the alarm goes off, whatever time it is. Sometimes it doesn't have to be at 5 in the morning. Like, most people think you have to do that and you have to plunge, and yeah, there's a place for that. But if you have a responsibility to others in business, or if you have a responsibility to grow something or be a part of a team, in order to do that effectively, not efficiently, but effectively, you have to make those choices that overcome your giving yourself permission to not wake up, to not hit the ground running, to not have an attitude of gratitude, to not be appreciative for the fact that you're breathing that day. And some people can't walk. So the least you can do is take a couple steps outside before a 6 or 7 a.m. flight.
So, I'm really curious, when did your ability to sort of train your mind, as you just said, when did that start for you? When did you realize that, "Hey, I actually have more control than I've been told I have, or that people make me think I have"? Talk to us about those moments when it's just started to develop for you.
It was pretty young. I'm gonna be real honest with you. I won a couple of national titles in travel ball at different levels, NSA, ASA Gold, and you know how it is with youth sports. There's so many divisions and different ways you can go. But you know what I love? And most people think, oh, Sam, is this a good thing? But this is what I love. I love that most people know me for my heart. They know me for my will and never wavering. So we had gotten into, for example, it was pretty young. We got into the losers bracket. That means we lost the first game. So that meant we had to play 7 games back to back. It was raining. We were playing at midnight. Most people would say, oh, that's a lot, 7 games. And for me, it's like one win to the next win to the next win. And who cares? Who cares if it's ugly? Who cares if you hit a home run from the ground? Who cares if, you get hit by a pitch and you really wanted to hit the single, right? So it was like those moments that I never had failing as a negative part of me, but it was, how do I just do it faster? Like, how do I fail in game instead of learn after the game? And then I started to approach that in sport of, well, how can I do that at bat? So I don't wait and waste an at bat. So what I became was very intentional for all of those moments. And if I didn't have a good at bat, I wouldn't take my offense out to my defense. And I really delineated what my role and responsibility was. And I started to get my mind right really young. So I never gave myself the permission of what if it doesn't. I was always, well, what if it does? And then I just figured out how to like athleticize it where it made sense to me in those moments where I started to recognize it and then help others get the mindset there where it became a collective whole, being aligned, going in the same direction. You don't have to agree with the way I do something, but if we're aligned, moving in the same direction, then it really kind of propels from there.
So I have to ask you, how did that play out for you in corporate America? So you went from a collegiate athlete, corporate America, to doing what you're doing now, which we'll get into in a minute. But I'm curious. I've been in corporate America in the past too, and that lasted about 7 years, and that was enough for me. Um, Usually, that personality doesn't really gel well in a. Actually, I won't even answer the question for you. I'll just ask the question. So how did that play out for you in corporate America?
It actually was quite the opposite to what you were alluding to. And, you know, I was also very fortunate to be in proximity to other leaders who understood that they needed to give me a little bit more room and let me fail a little bit. But I always built the relationship and created a common language so I could meet them where they're at, understand the expectation of the role itself. But I was never in a role that existed before. So I'm going to repeat that. I was never in a role that existed before. They always created a role for me from day one. So I've always been able, because of the environment and because of others being able to see and feel, and it happened in the interview process because I interview others just as much as I was interviewed. And what I started to understand was I needed to be mentored. I needed to be sponsored where people were talking about me in rooms that I was not in. But I had to do what was needed for them to feel comfortable and to establish an understanding of the values I stand in. And I focused there. It was less about the work product. I knew I was going to execute. Right? I drive results. I'm an athlete, right? First in, last out, the controllables. Definitely had that. But it was around, well, how do I tailor myself to being this bull in the china cabinet of results orientation to the coachability, the softer skills that I amassed as a leader, and then how do I meet others where they're at, whether they're ego driven, power driven, whether they want the title, and being able to flex to that as a teammate, understanding the role in which I serve. And then I became all about serving others. And then I started getting all the mentoring, all the formal programming, everything being put around me from a resource perspective. And then I started to get into these rooms at a really young age because I didn't shy away from it. And I wasn't afraid of a 20-hour day. I didn't have kids, right? I really had prioritized different things in my life that were important to me at that time. And from that point on, not only getting into the rooms, understanding that we're all just trying to figure it out, even if you've been there 40 years. It really changed my mindset of, well, I deserve to be in that room. And once I got there, then there was no limit for me.
That's super powerful. And I'd love for you to go even a little bit deeper.
Mhm.
We've got an audience member listening today who could be in that corporate America seat, and she's struggling with the identity in the workplace. Could you go into a little bit more detail around like creating that role for yourself? How did those conversations go? Just give us a little bit more meat for that bone, please.
Yeah. So a lot of times people focus on the job rec, right? So the description of the job that is in front of you, right? So there's a little bit of, you don't want to give too much because you're not paid for doing above and beyond, and there's that flow of going above and beyond, so that you can have higher highs and higher lows, right? So I was able to do that well and not well early on, right? I was putting in the hours and giving Lamborghini effort off of Ford pay, but I also understood the longer term gain, right? I wanted to garner experiential skills. So I made that trade off of, I am going to give time, right? And I'm going to get the experience, because if I get the experience, it completely changes the trajectory of where I want to go. And then I can test a lot of different things in parallel path, all the multitude of functions, all the multitude of markets that I potentially could leverage and get into. And then it started to be like, okay, well, hold on a minute. I don't necessarily need to do the actual work. Sometimes if I'm in proximity, like for example, mentoring, right? Finding a mentor that's in a completely different space, former athlete, right? I didn't wait for things to come to me. I was aggressive to go after them. And then what I was very malleable. I was very coachable. People like to talk about themselves. People want to actually help if you just ask for help. And that's where athletes go wrong. They're afraid to ask for help because I am great, you are not. I'm going after the reward. Well, if I tell someone my plans, maybe someone will take it. You have to bypass that power and ego side of it. And on day one, this is for me the biggest thing. On day one of any role I was ever in, I always looked for my replacement. So not only am I trying to better my experiential skills, harness the soft skills, coach people that are coaching me, it goes both ways. When you're a mentor and a mentee, there's different things you can cross pollinate together. Just because they're your mentor doesn't give you any less authority and ability to also support back. And that's where I think people go one sided, right? It's like, if you're my manager, you have to tell me the development plan. No, these are the things that are important. Let's collaborate together and let's figure out how we never leave something open. And we always make sure we have the right people in the right roles, because when you know who's going to take your role, that frees your ability up to go faster. And that's where I think people go wrong. They're just looking for that next role and they're not thinking about the hole that they're leaving and what is the dynamic of the team and impact to that manager. Because if you don't do that and you're not thinking of the whole, then why would the manager want to champion on your behalf? So it's those things. It's those critical things, or starting a meeting and level set. Hey, where are our mind and hearts? So you know where everyone's at, so you can meet them where they're at. And, for me, that was a huge differentiator, on top of the fact that I knew a lot about the individual person. So from a union, we had 6 unions. I knew their kids. I knew what was important to them just as much as the executive team. There was no one that was better off than others. Everyone, for me, it was relationship oriented. And if I had to stay late so they can go to a soccer game, I did it without question, because that's important. So it's those individual little things that become a part of your DNA, less of you're doing it to further yourself. It becomes a part of your culture of how you operate, so you can shoot for your purpose.
I really like the way you just talked about finding your replacement on day one, right? Because so many times we get in situations or positions and we kind of get into this protective mode, right? It's mine, don't take it. And then when change happens,
Mhm.
we're sort of shocked and we're not prepared, and therefore, that kind of just snowballs. Sam, getting into the next transition. So what spurred you to leave corporate America to start your own business, your own career, what you're doing now?
So I loved what I was doing in corporate America, and that's what always throws people. Most times people leave because they had a terrible experience or they didn't feel seen, heard, or valued. I was given resources. I also saw a huge spinoff from it, into its own publicly traded company. So you name it, I was engulfed in it. So leaving that was a huge decision because I loved it. I was working in food security. So I just wanted to ground you in where I was because leaving that was hard because I loved it. But what you realize is the whole power and success is a huge thing that most people bask in. I want to get the title. Well, why do you really want the title? Right. And I started to question, well, what was I really aiming for? What was I going after? So I wanted to always say thank you and give back to the sports community. I just never had a mechanism or I didn't know the first step to help. So I always felt like, well, I can be in corporate America and then I can become a platform and pipeline for athletes, right? And mentor and all of those things. So I made that decision of saying thank you and giving back and finding a way to do it. That's the first step because a lot of times we get so engulfed in what we're doing, we never remember to say thank you and give back to those mentors, those teachers, those coaches, right? The community that afforded you that platform. So I was always in an attitude of, gratitude with that. So that was the first thing. Then at Pitt, they were developing a mentorship program, and I, started to formally mentor about 2 athletes, and then it became informally like 100 athletes, and then it's become thousands of athletes since then. But in particular, during COVID, there's a lot of mental health issues kind of boiling up. It's not that mental health became an issue. It's always been there. It's all the complexities and pressures and pressure is a privilege, but there was all these different things hitting athletes, but think about like everyone's world stopped. And athletes no longer had sport overnight. Games were stopped
Mhm.
in the middle of a game. And it was at that point, some of the athletes that I was mentoring saying, Sam, you need to be doing this full time. Like you're really helping us. And I'm like, oh, I'm not a this or that individual. I'm a this and that. Like I can do both and at a high level. But what became really evident to me was athletes were asking me for help. And I wasn't hearing that at the time. And it wasn't until, two big time athletes that literally almost took their life. And it got real serious for me then. And it became, well, hold on a minute here. This whole power and success that I'm going after, I'd be grossly negligent to not do something bigger than myself here,
Mm.
given the magnitude of what was in front of me. And this was about 2021. And at that point, I said, I'm going to bypass power and success, and I'm going to focus on meaning and contribution. And how can I live a life of fulfillment so I can look left and right and bring a whole community with me versus potentially having this huge title, great salary, donating to a cause, but not enacting the change that I so aspire to have. So that was a huge catalyst. And I give you that color so you can understand, like I gave up a lot, but what I gained was so much bigger than myself. And it amplified the values that I stand in. And I didn't even realize my noble cause until that moment. And I realized pretty quickly that it's not about me. This isn't
Mm.
about me. And as much as I love I am great, you are not, and rewards and getting all of that, like at the end of the day, you have all the trophies that I had when I was younger. Like, well, do I talk about them anymore? No, I don't. So at that point, it became really clear to me that, I'll write a book, scale it, just be a resource. I self-published. I didn't think anything of it. I just thought it was going to be a tool. And it became a bestseller in like multiple categories. I self-published. And from that point on, it really was no turning back where I couldn't do both. And I'd be grossly negligent if I didn't go all in to supporting athletes, coaches, administrations, parents, as well as, active service members and veterans, right? Transition beyond the battlefield and all the complexities that go around that.
Powerful. I've got another friend to introduce you to at another point in time who's doing something very similar with Navy SEALs. He's an ex-SEAL,
Okay.
beautiful human being.
Mhm.
Um, so as a spectator, right? I do triathlon, as you know. I'm
Mhm.
a back of the packer. No one's paying me to do it. But as a spectator of sport, what should I know about those athletes that I don't know? From a You talked about mental health. You talked about, we see them as elite and we don't really appreciate as much the gruel, the nights they've had to work out late, the vacations they've missed, the spring breaks they've skipped. But as a spectator, as me sitting on the couch watching football, what should I know about those athletes that would be eye opening? I'm not sure I'm asking the question properly, but I hopefully you get the gist. Like, what? How can I appreciate what I'm seeing more by understanding those athletes in a better way?
They're human. Start
Mm,
there. Humanize them, right? Athletes are very polarized and at different levels, right? And some are making a ton of money with name, image, and likeness, right? Some are getting the visibility on the main stage on media, right? But remember, when you have that moment, when you have a lot to say about a current performance that, maybe they're not doing as great as you need them to, and it's messing up your fantasy football, or your fantasy teams, it's great to have fun, right? And you have to understand the pressures that are put on these athletes. Sometimes they don't give themselves the permission to be human.
mm,
So when you have that moment where you want to yell and you want to do all that, it's great to have the emotion. It's great to create that atmosphere, but humanize people. And would you want someone to talk to you in that way? Would you want someone to talk to your son or your daughter or your cousin or your niece? And when you start thinking about it like that, it changes the game for you. And what I recommend most people do, and this is what I do, it's the number one thing I do with athletes. The reason I'm effective with athletes at all levels in sports that I have never played and can get these first, draft picks, first round draft picks, all the way to Olympians and everyone in between, is the fact that I show up to their community events, their nonprofits, the things that they're supporting, the things that really show their values. That's what I show up to. Yeah, I can go to a game, but I can also watch that on film. So I challenge you to support, if you're really about a player, support what they get behind, understand those values, and make sure that you're supporting really the holistic part of that person, not just what you see on, the week when they're playing and performing. And I think that changes the game for most people.
A light bulb just came on for me, and I was in a conversation this morning
Mhm.
with another set of parents who were talking about their son's soccer game
Okay.
and how at the end of the game, I guess the losing team went up to this high school ref and just gave him a mouthful about his reffing performance. And the light bulb that came on for me was that probably started with an adult sitting on a couch yelling at the football team on a screen, and then that just trickles down over time to a point that you think that's okay to do to a high schooler who's learning how to referee a soccer game. Any thoughts or comments on that light bulb moment for me?
Oh yeah, I've got a lot of comments on that, but I'll keep it. I'll keep it high level, and then if you want to drill, we'll drill down. I always say this to parents, and it gut checks them. It is not your dream. It is your child's. You can have passion all day. And I love that because it creates an atmosphere. It helps create the pressure situation where there's a lot of hard and soft skill development from that. The failure, opportunities that come from that. Notice I don't talk about the success, right? Like I talk about the failures, but it's really, really starting to challenge yourself on, well, why are you yelling? Right? Or did you not have the opportunity to play Division 1? And now you're living your Division 1 dreams through your child and putting unneeded additional pressure where you're supposed to be the safe space, or not understanding the impacts of what you're doing to a referee, right? A referee has another job. A lot of times that's not their sole job, and they're human too, right? So when you think about wanting to say that negative thing, just know if your child is as good as you believe they are, and they are going to perform at and play at the collegiate level, say we're talking youth sports right now, or say you're in the collegiate environment and your child and is slated to go play professionally, right? You already know the percentages, they're low, right? To go to college, it's only like 5%, and then to go pro is like 1.5 to 2%. So we're talking small margins here. That means there's only so many spaces. So when your kid is being recruited, a lot of times these scouts, these coaches, they're not looking at the athlete. They can see film of the athlete. They are looking at the parents, because you are a part of what will change that culture. And you may be the reason why your kid does not get recruited to their dream school, because you thought what you were going to say was so important and that you were going to bully someone into putting a position or a play or a call your way. Be better. And I'm pretty tough on that, because you think you're helping and you're actually hurting. And there's no need for it, no place for it in sports. Passion is one thing, ignorance is another.
Sam, that's a great lesson. And it could be an entire podcast just diving deeper into that.
Oh, yeah.
I'm going to shift gears a little bit and talk about that similar topic, but from the athlete's perspective,
Mhm.
right? And we were working with these guys and girls who are at the elite level.
Mhm.
How do they handle that pressure, that negativity, that SOB sitting on the couch yelling at them for dropping a pass or missing a 2-foot putt, and it just ruined their afternoon? And they hear it, right? You go to a golf tournament, you hear the comments. You go to a football game, you see how fans react. And to your point, these are human beings who have to absorb all this over and over, along with some of the glory, if and when that happens. But talk to us, like, how are you helping those athletes from that mental perspective to get through all those spectators that are kind of painting a picture that doesn't really need to be painted?
So there is no one size fits all. I'll start there. Most people think there is a one size fits all. There is not. Every person has different biases, different upbringings that result in how you get triggered or how you perceive something. Okay. I grew up where I had the ability to fail. I was given that environment. So that is all I know. Some people were never given that, right? Some had, the only way that they thought they can make a name for themselves was through sport. They didn't think they could be a doctor. They didn't think they can do those other things. So it starts there, and really drilling down on, well, what are your biases? What is that subconscious? Like, what is really your mindset and how are you wired? That's the start, because understanding how someone is wired and how they show up and how they receive and where they get triggered gives us the opportunity to be very customized with each athlete based off of where we reframe, where we unlearn, where we rewire. So it's not just a psychology, perspective. It's also, from a neurological perspective on what actually chemically happens and how long does that take to, break a pattern and create a new one. And when you start breaking that down to athletes and you let them have the space to say, oh, wow, what I feel is okay, that I have all of this around me and I'm actually doing better than I thought, they start to take the lead role in sitting down and collaborating and figuring out how we put a holistic plan together. So when those moments happen, they're prepared. Proper preparation prevents piss poor performance. So if you can't be an expert in yourself, you can't really be an expert in anything else. People are going to say what they're going to say. You can't control that. But we can create tools. Like, I'll give you an example of a tool we use. An athlete who stresses, the perfectionists. We have a lot of them, right? Major confidence issues. Very big commonality across some of the best athletes. You wouldn't even imagine. One of the first things we do is, hey, take out a piece of paper, lay all your stresses out. Put them all out. All out in real time. And even sometimes, like in golf, when you're walking from point A to point B, write them all out. Because the art of writing it out is so important, because not only are you seeing it, you're writing it, you're hitting all of your senses. You're acknowledging where you're at. So what it does is it creates a ability to be present. What am I present to? Instead of fear is the thief of joy. It's taking that away and focusing on, well, where am I right now? What do I feel right now? So then we can create tools for you to reframe, unlearn in real time. So you do it. You don't rely on me. I'm just going to help be a mirror so you can create the space for you to accomplish it. So write all your stressors out. Then the ones you can't control, X them out. I learned that from a Navy SEAL. X them out. You can't even waste the energy on it because you have no ability to change that outcome because you have no control over it. So let's prioritize the ones you can control. And some of them are the most basic things. Sometimes it's just literally keeping your head up. Because you keep your head up and you have all these people hitting you. People are like, wow, they're staying neutral. They're staying calm in chaos. The voices start to die down. It's when you let someone have the power over you with words that are sharp but have no meaning. Well, when you give them meaning and you give them power, it changes your potential next step. That's what we focus on. How do we unpack and how do we create a space for you to be where you're at, be where your feet are, but also give yourself the grace that some of them you're just not going to do really well in real time. And those are the ones we parking lot. And then what we do is out of the game, out of, the court, out of, the stadium, then we start to actually focus on, well, what are very distinct tools that can help on those moments that you're not prepared for yet. It's all about preparation. So that's like an actual tool we use quite a bit.
I love that tool. And I've used it similarly when writing down my stressors and then just lighting it on fire. And somehow it just makes you feel better.
Mm-hmm.
Sam, it sounds like you have a team of people you're working with supporting these athletes. Is that true? Or are you sort of, because there's no way, I don't think you could have this impact on so many people just by yourself. So can you talk to us about the team and the business that you've built around this?
So it is a small team, but a mighty team that we're building. And I think that the cool thing about it is it will be former athletes. There's no one better to serve an athlete than a former athlete, and giving them the space, whether they want to do it full time or part time, if they just want to mentor or they actually want to facilitate. That's what's so cool about what we're building. It's really community. And that creates a whole different lean in ability for others to figure out, well, how can they add their part? How can they do, what they can within their means to do it? And it may not be full time today. It could be down the road, but I have athletes that hit me up all the time that say, hey, I'm still playing pro overseas. I finished the WNBA. I'm playing pro overseas, but man, I'd love to do stuff when you're doing stuff with the WNBA. It helped me with my transition. I don't really know all the answers, but I know sports. How cool is that, right? Like, I don't have to hire a sales team because the community is the sales team. They're opening the doors and then they're getting a percentage of that. So they're understanding how to monetize their network, which I'm teaching them skills. And at the same time, for the length of that program, those athletes in perpetuity get a percentage of that program. So they understand passive, right? So it's like actually applying knowledge while, creating an ecology within the community. So that's one thing. But we are building quite extensively, and we just had a merger that is now living under Success Beyond Game Day. It's called Human Impact Productions. And I'm super excited about that because that brings impact from an entertainment perspective. So if you think about that big umbrella of entertainment, right? Sports and entertainment have so much, parallel synergy, good intersections if done right. I'll be honest with you. And in some ways, some of it's done really exceptionally well, and some are not. Like in the entertainment industry, there's not a lot of structure. In the sports industry, there is. You go youth sports, high school, college. The entertainment industry doesn't have that for an artist. But there's a lot of athletes who want to be artists, and there's a lot of artists who want to be athletes. And you see that all the time. So we felt what an opportunity to not only give tools in the space, but also create an experience with STEAM education, science, technology, engineering, the arts, and math, and really put it around the stadiums. So we start working on youth mindset through and through and show the parallel paths of careers that you could have across sports and entertainment. So we just had that merger happen over the last month. Super exciting. And we're getting ready to launch a lot of different things with some universities that are going to be out right now, and some youth programs, some pro, football, as well as, pro women's sports. So there's a lot going on, and a lot of people that are going to be coming into the organization quite quick.
That's awesome and super exciting.
Yeah.
So an audience member wants to follow you, wants to follow this progress. What's the best social media platform for them to keep track of you?
Yeah. So Instagram is always easy. Success Beyond Game Day, or my personal handle is Samantha Card. We're also putting a lot of scholarships out there. So if you're a former athlete and you want to start a business, or if you have a big, noble cause that really are aligned to some of our values, which you'll know what our values are going onto our site and stuff. There could be a mechanism for you to get funding, and that's what we're really building, right? How do we really not only set the environment but also help be a catalyst for others? So follow us. That's the number one thing, because then you'll see all the different things that we're launching, and there could be some good name, image, and likeness opportunities. It can help set up, your nonprofits, all the different things that might be of importance to you. That'd be good there.
Awesome. And we'll include those in our show notes. Sam, this conversation's fantastic, and I'm really enjoying it. And I wish I could let go for 4 more hours. Um, but what has connected for me is we just talked about, you're building this business, you're building a community, and these players and athletes and entertainers are coming to you with sort of an undefined role. They just know they want to be a part of it, and they telling you what they want to do.
Mhm.
And it's very similar to the story you shared earlier in the podcast around your Fortune 100 experience, where you defined the role. You just said, "Hey, this is what's important to me. This is what I want to accomplish, and here's my plan for my replacement." You're mimicking that, and it's
Mm.
fantastic. So I just wanted to recognize that as we close out the show, that for all those audience members who are in a transition, think about the principles and the learnings that we've discussed today and how they can apply to your situation. Audience members, please like the show. Please subscribe. Follow Samantha on social media. Let's get this message out. Share it with our community. Again, Sam, it's been fantastic having you on the show. Thank you for your time.
Thanks for having me. I had a lot of fun.
Thank you for tuning in to the Chief Endurance Officer podcast. To hear more inspiring stories and strategies around the endurance mindset, be sure to subscribe below or visit us at chiefenduranceofficer.com. Until next time, keep pushing those limits.